It's 8 a.m. and a beautiful 70 degrees in Boston, Massachusetts. You're listening to Lofi Poli Sci. Oh, yeah, Lofi Poli Sci coming at you. I'm your host, Michael Pickering, and I hope you're ready for another Tuesday's Top 10. And today we're welcoming back to the show our good friend, Gregory Day, a writer, director, bookseller, and the voice behind Hipsville AD, the blog that is the one-man fanatical sect of the god of subculture with fervent ramblings of all breeds of cinematic pleasures. Gregory Day, my good friend, how the hell are you?
I'm doing really well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, glad to have you back. Definitely. But let's jump right into this list, my friend. What's this top 10 film list that you've created for us today?
Today we're going to be talking about East Asian cinema. I got a eclectic list of films from the region.
Eclectic. I like the sounds of that for sure. Very, very interesting. Let's go ahead and jump on into it then. Coming in at number 10, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I've got this film called Stray Dog from 1949. It's from Japan, directed by one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, Akira Kurosawa. This is shot just a few years after World War II ended. It's a crime thriller following a rookie cop who's lost his gun to a pickpocket while he's traveling home on the bus. But it's not just a highly entertaining crime flick. It's an examination of the desperation of Japanese society after the war, as the cops and the criminals kind of mirror each other in desperation. But it's got a lot of great scenes shot on, real life black market. So they had to hide a camera, and you see all this almost documentary filmmaking of how the society was. And then there's a great scene at a baseball game. So you really see the Americanization of their culture at the same time. And it's just a great crime film. It's in a sweltering summer, and it's just an early masterpiece by Kurosawa.
Most excellent. Kurosawa, definitely a famous director, not just in Japan, the entire world. But I
Yes,
want to
absolutely.
definitely come back to this 1949 idea later in the show.
hmm
But
hmm
let's keep going. What do we have at number 10? I mean, number
Oh yeah.
nine.
Oh yeah, number nine. Yeah. We're switching gears here. It's gonna be this from 2018. This is Ash is Purest White, from China. I'm gonna butcher the director's name, but Jai Zhangke, who is one of the most premier filmmakers right now to me in the world, out of mainland China. This film is told in three parts. It's about kind of focuses on the triad and how it is. Struggling to keep up with the ever-growing corporate culture in China, and it's told in these three parts and it centers around this relationship between a woman and her gangster boyfriend, and how gun laws work in China, and how criminals are finding it harder and harder to even compete with the corporatization of things. And each story kind of jumps forward in time, and you see how their grip on things is lessening more and more as skyscrapers go up and as corporations are taking over things. And it's a beautiful film. It's very sad as you're watching these two people kind of drift apart in this new country. It's just an excellent film, man.
Right, right. And I love the dichotomy and the underworld of China competing with not just the corporatization of China, but also, the Chinese government in and of itself being so controlling and having that competition between the underworld and the Chinese Communist Party, and then corporatization comes in. It's a weird, interesting mix. I really dig it.
Yeah, and it's really like a metaphor for the small businessman or businesswoman not being able to keep up in this kind of fast-paced capitalist society.
Right, right, right. All right, let's go ahead. And what do you have for us for number eight?
Yeah, number eight is a film that's very dear to me. It's called Perfect Blue. It's from 1997. It's another film from Japan, but it's an anime this time by the great Satoshi Kon, who did Paprika and Paranoia Agent, the TV series. This one's like a horror paranoia thriller that's centered around the entertainment business and just how exploitative it is. It's about a pop idol who is forced by her management team to become an actor in like a soap opera, and as she's trying to transition into this, she becomes or like her psyche fractures, and she doesn't know what's real and what's not, like what's in her life and what's the show. And she's also being stalked by this psychotic individual who's harassing her, and so but you also don't know if that's in the show or if that's in her real life, and she's really losing it. It's a really famous anime from the late 90s that's been ripped off repeatedly by some very successful American uh, directors here, but it's just like a really great adult anime.
I love the inclusion of an anime on this list. I mean, I'll go ahead and tell everyone out there, the nerd and the geek in me, I love anime. Just that's all me. That's all me. But I
Yeah.
also love the idea of like, an up and coming star, but being exploited by their managers or by the corporatization of youth culture going into pop idol star. And you see this all the time now with K-pop, in the real world. It's all over the place. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I think this is very interesting. And it goes to show 1997, this is not a new topic.
Hmm.
It's just something that we're starting to see more of just in relation to K-pop.
Hmm.
All right, and number 7, what do we have?
Yeah, we got this one's a little lesser known than most of the films on this list. It's called Alipato, very brief life of an emperor. It's from the Philippines by a sort of guerrilla filmmaker named Caven. He's just a DIY punk rock filmmaker who really takes to the streets with digital cameras and really digs in these like poor neighborhoods and things. But those are like the backdrops of his films. But this film is it's sort of a subgenre of crime films where it's like the criminal going straight kind of story. But it's set in the future, so it's got a slight sci-fi slant to it, where Manila's kind of just one giant trash heap, and it's about like these almost like a Lost Boys kind of child gang when they're running around and they're robbing and murdering. Um, but it jumps forward a little bit to where the leader of that gang gets out of prison, and now he's an older man and he's trying to go straight with his life and kind of reconcile all the bad things that he's done in his life. But it's still set in this really grimy, neon lit world of this kind of Manila. But it really also kind of takes jabs at Western humanitarianism, and it's really funny and inventive because it's got a lot of like GoPro shots and just got a lot of weird and strange things like stop motion animation in the middle of it. It's like a real blast to watch. It's really funny, but it's also a really deep and sad film about Filipino society.
Yeah, and this came out in 2016, is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and especially with the backdrop of Manila, being such a massive town in the Philippines, and you look at this film and you look at reality, you can definitely see like the parody of trying to, like you said, funny in some parts, but it's trying to just show kind of what life is. And in 2016 to 2021, I think it's still 5 years. It's extremely relevant and new about what's
Mhm.
going on in the country right now. All right, excellent, excellent. Now, what do we have at number 6?
Yeah, number 6 is a film called Tropical Malady. It's from 2004, from Thailand. One of the premier filmmakers of the world is in Thailand right now, and I'm maybe going to mispronounce his name, but his name is Apichatpong Weerasethakul. He just won a major award at Cannes this year, but his films of the last 15 to 20 years have been extraordinary. But this one I really like. It's sort of told in two parts. The first part is like a romantic comedy about a soldier who's on leave who spends the weekend with his boyfriend, and it's just a fun, good time of them hanging out and going to the movies and sort of sharing their time together. Um, and you kind of see the mundaneness of just them hanging out. But then the second half of the film, it kind of restarts, and there's a new credit sequence and everything. It's almost like you're watching a whole new movie. And then it's this tale of the soldier who has to go into the heart of the jungle and confront this tiger spirit. And it's like a metaphor for his confronting his fear of commitment, really. But it's it really gets into like these Thai mythologies and Dark Night of the Soul kind of stuff as you're in the jungle. He's a beautiful filmmaker, and he really mixes like reality and then social topics with mythology, or especially Thai mythology, which is so foreign to us over here. When I watch this film, I don't know if I get the entire context, but it's just beautiful to watch these things come together in his films, and it's beautiful and it's strange, and it's completely different than anything we have here in the West.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not familiar with this director and the work or this film in particular, but I do have to say that I love the idea of making a movie that stops halfway through and rolls a new credit scene and then just kind of flies into something different, although still connected though, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's another thing from him is that he loves to kind of deconstruct how movies are or paced or how they're constructed. A lot of his other films also have weird interruptions and he'll restart things. But this one is probably the most jarring where you're like, okay, I've watched 45 minutes of this couple and now there's a new credit sequence running and what's going on? And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, there's a whole different tone and everything. But they do really fit well together. But you do have to go on the ride. You do have to sit through the first half and then sit through the second half before you really get the full picture of what he's trying to tell you.
And you see, I love that because why should we have to view cinema as some monolithic, stereotypical Hollywood hour and a half, 2 hour movie and just that's it? Why can't we do something different and new? Excellent choice. All right, Gregory Day, now to our top five. And what do you have for us at number five?
Yeah, number five is a film that I absolutely love. It's called Tampopo. It's from 1985. It's another one from Japan. It's by Juzo Itami. This is a film that's kind of not really been that not really seen a lot here in the States up until in the last few years. The Criterion Collection put out a disc here and it's kind of like exploded with popularity. It's a ramen western, like a really big crowd pleasing comedy. It's about Tampopo. She runs a ramen shop, but she's not very good at making ramen. And this truck driver and his partner kind of roll through town, and then they stop and they're going to help her try to make the best ramen shop they could possibly um, run there. But it's sort of a western, but it's also got all these different sort of asides where they're like Hollywood gangster films or Hollywood slapstick comedies that are sort of like Chaplin or Buster Keaton. And it's got like almost like a 30s gang thing, which is a little separate from the gangster, but it's like gang fights, fist fights in the street and stuff like that. But overall, it's just like a really great movie about food. It has a lot of scenes about them making the ramen, so it's really informative about that and about how Westerners eat and how Easterners eat. But at the heart of it, it's really about the love story between the truck driver and Tampopo, and how their love is kind of showed over the course of them making this wonderful, simple bowl of ramen.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of bringing food into because food, whether you're Western, Eastern, Northern, Southern, it doesn't matter. Food is something that us as human beings, we connect to. You know, we can understand that everyone's got to eat. So
Hmm.
I kind of feel like bringing food and making it an important part of it, but then in a love story, like it helps for me as a Westerner to draw me in, be like, okay, I can connect with this. I can connect with this story, even if it may seem a little foreign to me. I still can, relate to a degree. And I do like the fact that they cook ramen, but they're not very good at it because what would be the stereotype in the West? It's ramen. Everyone can do ramen. You can't mess it up. You
Right.
put it in a microwave and it's done. And that is just not,
Yes.
not the case. But I
Hmm.
love it. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. The film also has like these asides where it's almost like a Rocky movie where he's making her go out and run to get her stamina up. He's making her like move the pot of water from one burn to another, back and forth, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, coming in at number four, where are we going?
Yeah, man, we're going to South Korea this time. We have a film called Memories of Murder by the great filmmaker Bong Joon-ho. This came out in 2003. Everyone out there listening may know Bong Joon-ho. He's sort of a household director name now. He just won a ton of awards across the planet for his film Parasite. Um, was it last year, the year before that? But he also made Snowpiercer and Okja, which is another like a Netflix film. These are sort of his Western films. Um, but his second feature, Memories of Murder, to me is his first masterpiece, and it's set in the 80s, and it's about a serial killer in rural South Korea, and it's a city cop and a country cop who do not get along, and they're trying to crack this case. And it's just masterfully constructed because it is really funny, as these two guys can't get along to try to solve this murder or the series of murders. But and then it's really terrifying as you see these murders unfolding in this small area. But also uncovers like corruption in policing in South Korea, and it's got a wonderful ensemble cast and a lot of great scenes for all you like film nerds out there who want to watch like how to construct scenes with big ensemble casts and long takes and stuff. And it really shows how the actors really take over. Selling the scene and selling how the characters are lived in these situations. And when you watch it, it's just it's like being teleported into this world. It's not like you're watching a film at all. It's just one of the most thrilling films of the last 20 years.
Yeah, and I can get behind the fact, granted, I haven't seen this film, but you really make me want to watch it for a couple reasons. One, whenever you say, you really get teleported into this world, into this film, I can totally buy it because I have seen Snowpiercer, and that whole film takes place on a train, and you don't even realize that once you get into the movie, you're in the movie, you're in that world, and you go from train car to train car to train car, but it doesn't really feel like that. Like you forget, and it's a great movie. So I'm really interested in this one. I think I'm actually gonna check
Mhm.
it out for sure.
Yeah, man, it's really it's scary. It's based on a true story of like I think this first South Korean serial killer. So it's really eerie, but also it's something about his films. He just pays a lot of attention to making you feel the world that the characters inhabit.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, number three. What do we have?
Number three is a film called Taipei Story from Taiwan. 1985 by the great filmmaker Edward Yang. Um, I could go on and on and on and on about the Taiwanese new wave of the 1980s. I just think those films are so good. They make me feel warm and fuzzy, even though they're not always pleasant films. But I just love those guys. They just to really, it's a group of young filmmakers who just came together and said, "We're sick and tired of seeing Chinese movies or American movies play here, and we're gonna go out and we're gonna make films that reflect our life and our parents' lives and like what it means to be Taiwanese." Um, which is a big political thing going on in that region between China and Taiwan. But these films really explore their own identity. And this one specifically is about a marriage that's on the rocks because the husband is very tied to the traditions of Taiwanese culture, hanging out with guys from the neighborhood. Some of them are a little, under the table with their practices, but they're tied to each other. They have these lineages. Whereas the wife in the marriage is uh, she's more adaptable to the capitalist society on the rise, and she's really able to navigate this world where he feels like he is falling behind. It's shot in this beautiful style, this simplistic style, but you get like it's always about framing the environment around these two characters, and it's deeply sad just watching these two people kind of experience different lives, even though they should be communicating together and being together, and they experience Taiwan in two different ways. And Edward Yang, we sadly lost him at the turn of the century. He only made a handful of films. He died very young from a brain tumor, but he left behind a wealth of pictures, even though there's not that many. Each of them are spectacular, and his sort of style is that showing people. Surrounded by their surroundings and how they shape these characters, and this one is just it's very beautiful and it's very sad.
I love the inclusion of this for a lot of different reasons. And I'll admit, I was not aware that there was like a Taiwanese new wave in cinema in the 1980s. And for lo-fi listeners out there, they're very familiar with the Taiwan China conflict that you mentioned. But I think a lot of us don't necessarily remember that this is nothing new. And this film came out in 1985, and you say the Taiwanese New Wave is all about showing Taiwan culture, Taiwanese life, and I think this is a really excellent
Mhm.
inclusion, for all of those reasons. And I am very intrigued, and I really would like to check out some of these films for sure. So great choice, my friend. Great choice. All right, coming in at
Yeah, thank you.
number two.
Yeah, number two, what easily in my top five movies of all time. It's called Chungking Express from 1994 from Hong Kong, by the great Wong Kar-wai, the filmmaker Wong Kar-wai. This one is just one of those all-time great feel-good movies. It's told in two parts. It's kind of almost a theme going on here in this list where things are told in disjointed ways, um, but this one it's like almost like two short stories about two inept cops in Hong Kong, or specifically in the Chungking Mansions neighborhood, which is sort of an immigrant neighborhood in Hong Kong. And it's about these two cops who aren't really great at their jobs. They're just kind of beat cops who walk around the streets, and you get this perfectly capturing the bustling feeling of being in Hong Kong and the neon lights in Hong Kong and the restaurants um, but it's really about these two cops and the women who who affect them. And then the second story, which is the predominant story of the movie, it's kind of uneven, where one is kind of short, and the second one is kind of the duration, the most the length of the film. Um, it's just this really great romantic comedy of this woman who works in a fast food joint, who is sort of fucking with this cop because she's got a big crush on him, and she's like rearranging things in his apartment, and just kind of screwing with him because he's sad and lonely after a breakup. And it just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy. It's got that great feeling of what it's like to like flirt with someone that you got a crush on, and then you don't know what's going to come next. It's sort of anxiety of like, oh, where's this going? But it's just it's the way I would describe it is it's a movie you're going to want to watch again as soon as it ends.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I wanted to ask you too. So, like
Mhm.
you said, it's kind of had two plots. A first one was a little short, and then the second one was really like the
Mhm.
long one, main one. Is it like parallel plots, or is it? Would you compare it to like Tropical Malady, where it was like two separate things but a joined at the end?
Oh yeah, yeah. So they do interlock. Like, so you'll see characters from the second one in the first one without context, and then when you're watching the second half, you do see characters from the first half in the second half, and you'll sort of get context of what happened, what they were doing in the first half.
And you see, I love that. It just like the mix and a melange of it. And once again, it shows that
Mhm.
filmmaking does not have to be done in the stereotypical Hollywood way. And I think that's a
Yeah,
great
one
thing to
hundred
show.
percent.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
And today's number one is.
Yeah, number one is Good Morning from 1959, or as it is in Japanese, Ohio, by the great filmmaker Yasujiro Ozu. And I've said a lot of people on this list are great filmmakers, but Yasujiro Ozu is, like Akira Kurosawa, one of the all-time great filmmakers that the planet has ever seen. Um, I wanted to begin this list and end this list with two master filmmakers, and Kurosawa and Ozu are definitely those two guys. Ozu, he made pictures about generational gaps in families, and as anyone who's familiar with Japanese culture knows, that's a big deal. Tradition's a big deal, and so his films always sort of focus on the generation gaps, maybe between the grandparents and the parents, or the grandparents, the parents, and then the grandkids. And so there's always dynamics going on, and as Japan is changing, especially after World War II, he really focuses about those gaps between those generations. And he made some like internationally acclaimed films, Tokyo Story being one of them, and Late Spring. But Good Morning is a film that doesn't doesn't have any less focus on the generational gap, but this time he's coming at it from a comedy angle. And it's a childhood comedy about these kids who go on a sort of give everyone the silent treatment. So they're basically going on strike from talking to their parents until they can get a television. Yeah, and all they want to do is they want to watch wrestling on TV, but their parents from their generation think that TV is only going to rot their minds. And so instead of studying, they're over at their friend's house watching sumo wrestling. And so these kids decide they're not going to talk to anybody except for each other. And these kids are about 8 and 6 maybe. And so it causes a big uproar in their little village because all the parents think that they're being rude, that they're not talking to them, and it just kind of unravels into this big upheaval in their town until the parents are forced to kind of deal with it. But still got this poignant things where Ozu likes to talk about, where you see the parents alone, and them having to deal with this generational gap. And but it's really funny. It's got a lot of fart jokes, which is really intriguing for a movie made in the 50s and made by this very serious filmmaker. These kids who sort of like to eat and then fart at each other, basically, and it's sort of a way of them communicating. And there's even a great scene of like a businessman farting, and his wife thinking that he's calling her from another room, and it's sort of the way the Japanese language and farting, it just goes really well together. But like this film, it's in beautiful color, and if a lot of modern audiences were to watch it, you see the big influence that Ozu's had on filmmakers like Wes Anderson today, where these very picturesque still shots, and the actors are perfectly placed in the frames. They don't really move a lot and stuff, and it's just very beautiful. Um, and this film, coming from one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, it's just an absolute blast. And Just one of the most entertaining films you're ever going to see.
Yeah, I love it. I love the description of it. I love the reasoning behind it. And once again, I think the premise is something that can appeal to audiences from anywhere. The fact that two little kids, they just want to live their life and do their thing, so they just stop talking to people.
Hmm.
All they want to do is watch wrestling.
Yeah.
And I think it's great. And I'm definitely surprised about the fart jokes in the 1950s Japan, for sure. Right, and there we have it. That is our list. But now, as is our custom on any top 10 list, we got to dig a little bit deeper. And let me ask you, Gregory Day, why this list? Last time when you came on, you did top 10 genre films. This time, you choose an introduction to East Asian cinema. Or really what I'm trying to say is, why is this list important to you, and why should people care about this list?
Yeah, there's a few different things. One, I really wanted to switch it up from the last list. But one thing that's very important to me to talk about was, over the last year or so, during this pandemic, Asians in our country at least have been getting a bad rap and um, have been experiencing a lot of hates and a lot of negative emotions coming from a lot of people in this country. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this region here, East Asian cinema specifically, because I could talk about literature or art or how much Asian culture has affected the world. But I'm a movie guy, so the way I'm going to talk about it is through great works of art that this region has produced. But also you can look at West Asia and you can look at India and the Bollywood movies, or Iran and look at their films and look at Asia as a whole and see, if you're not watching movies from this region, you're not really getting the full, um, you're not really experiencing the full depth of the medium. But you're also not really experiencing, the world at large if you're not looking at these films. We can't all afford to travel the world, but if you're looking at these films, you see their traditions, how they live, how they talk, how they interact with each other, and you can see there are a lot of things that are different from us. But really, when you look at these films, you're going to see how similar we are.
Definitely, definitely, I agree with all of that. I mean, there's so much, and granted, like a lot of these films I had never heard of, but Kurosawa, the director, you can't look at American cinema and not see his influence today
Oh hell no, yeah.
on a range of different movies
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
different styles. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because it's such a big one. It really is. Kurosawa has such an influence on Western filmmaking.
Yes.
Um, but and also the way that film is viewed. And so, like, one movie that I thought of, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a movie called Chocolate. It's
Mhm,
about this girl, and her mother and father are from two different East Asian countries. I don't remember exactly which ones that they are, but the little girl is around 12 years old or so, and she's autistic. And her mother and father are both in the underworld and crime, but her mom gets sick and she can't collect her money. And the little girl, being autistic, she starts watching Tony Jaa movies. And for people who don't know, Tony Jaa is like one of the world's greatest martial artists. He's from
yeah.
Thailand and he's all over Thai movies. He's really big.
Mhm, mhm,
And this 12-year-old autistic girl learns Muay Thai from watching Tony Jaa movies and then goes collect her mother's underworld collections to help pay for her mother's recovery.
mhm.
And then, like, her father, who, if I remember right, was in the Yakuza from Japan, she ends up like reconnecting with them. And it just, this is a movie worth checking out, but it's interesting for so many reasons of the fact that it deals with child's or children's autism. It deals with children who come from families where parents are sick. It deals with broken homes. It deals with the underworld. It deals with
Mhm.
love. It deals with martial arts. It deals with so many different genres all packed into one that you just don't see in Western or Hollywood type of movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let me ask you another question then for you. And this one's regarding your top pick from
Mhm,
1959. And it's more a
mhm,
question about the time frame than
mhm,
the movie itself. And as well as your number 10 pick was from 1949. And a lot of your movies from your last list were from the 1970s. And to be honest with you, I, as a person, as a movie watcher, have problems going back and watch old movies, especially if they're black and white. I just
mhm.
they kind of rub me the wrong way. I don't connect with them. Um, so what do you tell people like me, and really a lot of people, who have trouble going back and watching these old movies? You're here suggesting these older movies to us. How would you sell these movies to us?
Yeah, there's a great quote from Roger Ebert that I'm going to paraphrase. It said something that's along the lines of like every old movie is new to you if you've never seen it. So, I think looking at old movies, I think one thing to think about is that yeah, they are old, but and they're told in different ways, and they're have different fashion, different way of talking or speaking, and but if you can just get past those things, because what you really want to look for is like, what is the movie communicating to me? What is the filmmakers and their techniques? What are they saying to me? Um, but if to kind of ignore or have a standoffish sort of feeling towards old movies. Just think about like the idea of like the 20th century cinema was the premier art form. We're living in the 21st century now, where the internet is really the premier art form or entertainment form, and so. Going back and watching films from 100 years ago or 50 years ago, you're kind of looking at snapshot of time, and you're looking at how different techniques were born and how things were um, created and how the language of this medium was created through the century. Um, so those things, I think, if you're watching an older film, should go and try to experience. What are different generations before me? How do they figure these things out? How to talk about the human experience? And a lot of them are incredibly relevant today. So like if you look even 100 years ago, The Kid came out, the Charlie Chaplin movie, his first feature film, where he's trying to save a kid from being taken away to an orphanage that he is sort of taken under his wing on the streets. But that movie is about poverty, and if you think about now, like in the 20s, the 1920s, and the 2020s, we're dealing with the same exact thing, like how wealthy the wealthy are and how poor the poor are, and this kind of film really still resonates today. So, I think looking at old movies, it's just I think it's almost like if you're looking at continuity fails in films, you're not really paying attention to what is important in the movies. So, I think trying to force yourself to look at these kinds of films and get over some of the mechanics. And yeah, some of them are going to be dated. Some of them are going to be, cringy. Like if you watch a film from like 2002 to now, you're like, oh my God, it's got new metal on the soundtrack. And you're just like, oh, the techniques, bullet time, all those sort of things hadn't really aged well. And it's only been 20 years, right? So, but if you look at past sort of those things and kind of like, what is the movie trying to tell me? What are these acting techniques and what is the craftsmanship of movies back then when they had to shoot on film, when they had to hand build sets? Those are the things I would say to look for when trying to experience an older film.
I dig it. I really do. And I especially like your emphasis on how basically it's a commentary on life at that point in time. It's a snapshot on how the film director or how the artist viewed society and wherever the film
Mhm.
was from, but at that time and the interpretation of society itself. And I think you're right. You see the evolution of filmmaking, of language, of people's frame of thoughts. But even 100 years ago in a Charlie Chaplin film, they were dealing with the same social issues that we deal with today.
Yeah,
Um,
and I would say also we're lucky to live in a time where we do have moving photographic evidence of the past, right? Like in the 1920s, they didn't have that of the 1820s, but now we live in a world where for probably forever now we're going to be able to capture what it was like at a certain time and review it. Whereas before that we were always looking at paintings or literature to understand the world. And granted, a lot of these things are fiction, right? But we're still seeing things that people are talking about: fashion, how they spoke, traditions. All these things are in these films, and that's this is kind of where it begins. So now we have the internet that's going to document all these things, but before that we had cinema.
But I love it. I love it. Yes. And I agree with all of it. You make me want to watch older movies, which I just may have to do. Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much, my friend. But before we go for the day, I want to switch a little gears and talk a little bit more about you and ask you, what have you been doing lately? What do you have going on? And I also want to start off with Hipsville AD. What is Hipsville AD? And even where did the name come from?
Yeah, Hipsville AD is my blog that I write about cinema. I took a little bit of I'm taking a little bit of a break and kind of like coming back with a different approach. I'm doing uh, weirdly enough, top 10 lists. But I'm trying to do them in a way where I'm talking about one filmmaker and a 10 list of their films, and also kind of weave in biographies of them. So those are the things I'm posting now, as opposed to um, previously where I was posting editorial pieces about specific movies. So this would be brief glimpses into 10 movies, but also talking about the filmmaker and as the artist and how their lives had shaped the movies that they made. So I'm kind of updating some of those to be a little slower than my last um, run of doing essays, and then of course I think this will run into posting essays again. But Hipsville, the name Hipsville AD comes from a song by this band called Sparkles. They released this single, this like a garage rock single, 1967, called Hipsville 29 BC, and I really like that song a lot. But it made me think about the idea of that the golden age of cinema is 100% behind us. I think that
Oh,
um,
wow.
is not something that could be argued. It just definitely is. So I wanted to talk about what I think is cool movies, cool cinema, cinema that's important. Uh, in modern context. So AD meaning that we're after the fact that it's over, and um, so everything basically on this platform is going to be about older films. I'm not really thinking about reviewing the new movies coming out, and I have nothing against new movies. So, or if anyone else does, but I think objectively, you could say like the craftsmanship and everything, the money, all that stuff. Films are not what cinema is not what it used to be, and so sort of wanting to spotlight like this is all the great things about this medium from the bygone eras, because right now really we're experiencing that through the internet or television, where cinema's heyday is now behind us. So the title of it is definitely that the fact that we're in a different era and we're looking back at the older era.
Yeah, I love it. I didn't know that, and that's a great, kind of backstory about what your platform is about. And it's a pretty hip name, if I do say so
Oh,
myself.
thank you.
What are you working on lately, though? What's your newest thing for people to look for?
Yeah, the last thing I just posted on Friday is a top 10 list of films from the Polish director Andrzej Zulawski, who is most famous in America for releasing his horror film Possession back in 1981. But it's a list of 9 other films. That Possession's on the list, but 9 other films that are not really that well known in America. He made films all over Europe, and his life was very turbulent, and so the list basically is breaking down not only his personal life, but how he was affected by Cold War politics in both Poland and Germany, and working in France, and how his films kind of reflect that turbulent European lifestyle during the politics of the continent really shape him. And so going forward, I'm going to be doing a couple more of those, and kind of weaving in those sort of things. They're not all going to be as dark and despairing as the Andrzej Zulawski one is, because he was a very tough filmmaker. But yeah, I think those lists are going to be very cool to craft and share with people.
Excellent. Definitely looking forward to him. And go ahead and tell our Lo-Fi listeners where they can find you in these lists.
Yeah, so you can find me at Hipsville AD on Instagram. If you want any movie recommendations, just want to hit me up, you can hit me at hipsvillead@gmail.com. We can always talk there too. And then go head over to Substack, and you can find me on there as well. That link is always in my bio on my Instagram.
Excellent. Yes, my friends, definitely check out our friend Gregory Day. And once again, thank you so much for coming on. And we definitely look forward to having you back again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
And that's this Tuesday's Top 10 list. Check out this week's issue of Letters of the Lofi Poli Sci. Our theme coming out this Saturday, What's in a New Beginning? And look out for a special episode on the events in Afghanistan coming out later this week. You won't want to miss that. And always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Peace and well-being to all my human beings out there. Much love and always the best. Pickering and Day, signing off.